I have reached down over the side of a boat and taken hold of a man who had lived through the worst the sea can do to a soul. Hours in the freezing water, his ship long gone under, and him still breathing, still gripping, still fighting. And I have felt the life go out of him in my hands as I lifted him clear. Not in the wreck, not in the water, in the rescue, in the saving. The pulling of a man to safety has drowned more of them than the sinking ever did. I know how backward that sounds. Stay with me. Because there is a thing the sea does that no man tells you about. A thing so cruel and so quiet that most who see it never understand what they have seen. A man survives everything. He outlasts the wreck, the cold, the black water, the long hours when any sane man would have given up. And then, at the very last, when the boat comes and the hands reach down and he finally knows, that he is going to live. That is the moment the sea takes him. And the terrible part, the part one have carried for 50 years, is that the men reaching down to save him are the ones who kill him. And they do it with kindness, and they never know. Let me tell you who I am, so you understand I am not spinning you a tale. I have spent my life in the small boats, and the worst work those boats ever gave me was pulling men out of cold water. Some living, more dead, and a few, the ones I cannot forget, who were living right up until the instant we had them, and dead the instant after. I did not understand it the first time. I thought we had been too slow, or he had been too far gone, or God had simply decided. It took an old hand and a second man dead in my arms before I understood that we had not been too slow at all. We had been too rough and too quick and too glad. There was an old boat steerer who taught me the rule, though at the time it sounded like madness. He said, when you pull a man from cold water, you bring him in flat, never upright, never straight up, by the arms, however natural it feels, however much he is reaching for you. You lay him down in the bottom of the boat like he is made of glass, and you keep him flat, and you handle him as though he is still drowning, because he said he is. I did not believe him. It made no sense. A man out of the water is saved. Everyone knows that. And then I broke his rule, once, with a man half my age who had held on for hours, and I hauled him up quick and glad by his 2 arms, because I could not wait one more second to have him safe. And he died at the rail with his hands still closed around my wrists. That is when I began to believe. I asked him, after, how he had ever come to know a thing so backward, and he was quiet a long while before he answered. He told me that as a young hand he had watched his own captain, a good man, a strong man, reach down for a drowning shipmate and haul him up and out with one great glad heave, the way you would pull a friend from a ditch, and the man had come up dead in his hands, and the captain was never right again to the end of his days. An old sailmaker aboard, a fellow near 70 who had seen everything the sea does twice over, had taken the young boat steerer aside that same night and told him the truth of it. Quiet, mouth to ear, the way it had to be passed. Bring them in flat. And now he was handing it down to me the same way, because there was no other road it traveled. It was never written anywhere a man could go and find it. It lived only in the few who had seen it and been told, and it died a little more with every one of them the deep took. So hold this, and keep hold of it through everything I tell you. How does a man survive the killing sea for hours, reach the very hands that came for him, and die in the moment he is saved, with the rope still in his fist? That is the riddle. Sit with it, because the answer is 3 things at once, and every one of them looks like the right thing to do. Here is the first, and it is the one that killed the man at my rail. When a man is in the water is holding him, not just holding him up, holding him together. The pressure of the sea presses in on his whole body, on his legs, on his belly, and that pressure keeps his blood pushed up where it is needed, up in the core of him, around the heart. And his body, cold and failing and fighting to live, has already done the same thing on its own, pulled the blood in from his arms and legs, closed down the far reaches of him, and gathered everything it had left around the heart to keep it beating. So there he floats, cold and near the end, but alive, because the sea and his own body are together holding his blood where it must be, and then we haul him straight up out of the water. The moment he clears the surface, the pressure of the sea is gone, all at once. The thing that was holding his blood up vanishes, and there is nothing to replace it, and his blood does the only thing it can. It falls. It drops out of his core and down into his legs, all of it, in a rush, and his blood pressure collapses like a sail with the wind cut off. And his heart, cold and weak and slow, with nothing left to pump and nothing coming back to it, simply stops. He does not drown. He does not freeze. He is lifted into the air, into safety, into the arms of the men who love him enough to risk their own lives for his. And the lifting is what kills him. He is dead before his feet leave the water, and the men holding him feel him go, and to their dying day they will believe they were too late. They were not too late. They pulled him up the wrong way, the natural way, the way any man would, and the sea took its last chance. I will give you 2 men, because it is the 2 of them together that finally burned it into me. It was one bad night, one wreck, and we pulled both of them from the same stretch of freezing water inside the same hour. The first was a big, strong fellow, and he was the nearer. And we were glad, and we were quick, and 3 of us took him by the arms and hauled him up and over the gunwale in one heave, and he was dead at the rail, gone in the space between the water and the boat, so fast we would not believe it, and we spent a mad minute trying to shake the life back into a body that had had it a breath before. The second man we came to was smaller and weaker and further gone, and by then the old boat steerer had taken the pulling into his own hands, and he made us do it his way, and we cursed him under our breath for it. Slow, flat, easing the man over the low rail on his back as if we were laying a sleeping child into a cradle. No heaving, no hurry, his body never once coming upright, and that smaller, weaker, further gone man lived. He lived, and the strong one died. And the only difference in all the wide world between the 2 of them was the way our own hands had brought them out of the water. I have never gotten past it. I never will. Stay with me. Because there are 2 more ways it happens, and you need all 3. The second is slower, and it comes after a man is already in the boat, already out, already dry, already, everyone believes, saved. A cold man's blood has retreated to his core, as I told you. But the blood still trapped out in his arms and his legs has been sitting in the cold, and it is colder than the rest of him, far colder. As long as he is still, that cold blood stays out at the edges of him where it can do no harm. But the moment we start to work on him, rub his limbs to warm them, move him about, chafe his hands, do all the kind and sensible things a man does to bring warmth back to a frozen shipmate, we push that ice-cold blood out of his arms and legs and back into the center of him, back to the heart. And it arrives like a bucket of seawater poured straight onto a low fire. His deep warmth, the little core of heat he fought so hard to keep, drops lower still, colder than it ever got, in the water. And the heart, which was holding on at the very edge of what it could bear, feels that cold flood in and stops. He dies in the bottom of the boat, warm blankets on him, an hour after we pulled him out, and the men who rubbed his hands to save him never know that the rubbing is what killed him. The old hands called it a thing I will not translate into the doctor's words, but they knew it by watching. Warm a frozen man too fast, or too rough, or from the outside in, and you finish what the sea started. And the third way is the one I understand least and fear most, because it is not about the body at all. I have told you a man in that water is holding on by will, and I mean that more plainly than you know. His body should have quit hours ago. The only thing keeping his cold heart beating is the animal refusal to die, a thing that floods him and drives him and will not let go. But that refusal has a cost, and it burns something in a man to keep it up, and it can only be kept up as long as it must be. And here is the cruelty. The moment a man sees the boat, the moment he knows, truly knows, that he is saved, that he can stop now, that the fight is finally over, the will lets go. It has to. That is what it is for. And when the will lets go, the thing that was holding his heart together lets go with it. I have watched men die in the last 10 feet, close enough to see our faces, close enough to reach, die of the relief, die of the hope arriving, die because the very thing that kept them alive was the belief that they were not yet safe, and we took that from them by coming. A man can hold on through anything except being told he no longer has to. There was one I watched die that way whose face I still see when it is quiet. He had been in the water longer than any man I ever knew to come out of it breathing, and he had held on. God, how he had held on. And when our boat finally came up on him, he lifted his head and he saw us, and something in his face let go. I watched it happen. I watched the fight go out of him in the very instant he knew he was found. Watched him soften and settle back into the water like a man lying down into a bed after a long, long day. And by the time our hands reached him, there was nothing left in him to save. He had spent every last thing he had to last until we came. And lasting until we came was the very thing that killed him, because the coming told him he could stop. I have thought since that we would have done him a mercy to say nothing, to give no glad shout, to let him keep believing he was still alone and still had to fight for one more minute. But you cannot help but cry out to a man you have found, and so we cry out. And sometimes that cry is the last thing he ever hears, and it is our own glad voices, full of hope for him, that finally let him go. Now sit with the answer, because it is all three of these together. He lives on hope until hope comes, and then the hope lets go of him. We lift him wrong and his blood betrays him. We warm him wrong and the cold he beat comes back to finish him. 3 killings, and every one of them wearing the face of rescue, done by good men with kind hands who will grieve him the rest of their lives believing they failed. They did not fail. They did what looked like saving. And at sea, more often than any of us could bear to say aloud, what looks like saving is the last thing that kills. Why does no one tell you this? Why is it not the first thing taught to any man who might one day pull another from the water? Because the men who would know it best are the ones who did the killing, and they never learned what they had done. They pulled a shipmate up glad and quick and felt him die, and they wrote it down in their own hearts as being too late, and they carried that lie to their graves because the truth is worse and no one was there to tell them. The knowledge does not pass, because the men who need it most are certain they already understand what happened, and what they understand is wrong. And so it goes on, rescue after rescue. The same kind hands making the same kind mistake, for want of one old boat steerer to say the thing that sounds like madness. Bring him in flat and treat him as though he is still drowning. And so there are men walking the world right now, and men long in their own graves, carrying the weight of a death that was never theirs to carry. Men who pulled a father, a brother, a shipmate from the water with their own 2 hands and felt him die there, and have spent every year since certain that if they had only been a little faster, a little stronger, a little sooner, the man would have lived. It is the cruelest turn of the whole thing, crueler almost than the dying itself, because the truth would have set them free. It was not your speed that failed him, it was the manner of the saving, and you could not have known, but no one was ever there to tell them the truth. And so they blame the one thing in all of it that was never at fault, which was their own love, hauling too hard because it could not bear to wait one moment longer to have him safe. And if you want a hard fact to hold, here is one that ought to change how you think about every rescue you will ever see. Of the men taken from cold water, still alive, still conscious, still saved by every reckoning. By many accounts, something near 1 in 5 will still die in the minutes right after, killed not by the sea they just survived, but by the rescue itself. Near 1 in 5. Pulled from the water breathing, and dead before the blankets are warm. That is not bad luck. That is the sea collecting on the one dead a man thought he had escaped. So here is what the old hands knew, and what I am handing to you now, in case a day comes when there is a man in the water, and your 2 hands are the only ones that can reach him. Bring him in flat, whatever it costs you, however he reaches, however every instinct screams to grab his arms and haul him up and out. You get him horizontal, and you keep him horizontal. Because the moment you stand him upright out of that water, you may be signing his death. Handle him like glass. No rough hauling, no rubbing his limbs, no slapping him awake, no bracing chafing warmth. Lay him still and let him be still. Warm him slow and from the core, a warm body against his chest and belly, not fire on his frozen hands. And this above all, say nothing, do nothing that lets him believe the danger is over. Keep him in the fight. Do not tell a barely living man that he is safe, because the part of him that is keeping him alive is the part that does not yet believe it, and the instant it believes, it will let go. Treat a rescued man, for the first hour, as a drowning man, because that is exactly, precisely, what he still is. After that one bad night, on our boat, we changed the whole of how we did it, and we never went back. We rigged a way to bring a man in over the low part of the gunwale flat on his back. 2 men easing and a third guiding his head, so his body never came upright between the water and the boat. We stopped rubbing frozen men and started simply holding them, chest to chest, under whatever cover we had, keeping still and letting them be still. And we made a hard law of the hardest part of all, that whoever had the man would keep talking to him low and steady, as though the danger were not yet past, would give him a thing to keep fighting for, a hand to grip, a voice to answer back to, and would not once say the word safe until the man was warm all the way through and long, long out of the cold. It felt like a cruelty, keeping a saved man afraid. It was the opposite of cruelty. It was the only kindness that ever worked. They did not die because the sea was merciless. The sea had already done its worst and lost. The man had beaten it. He was out. He was breathing. He had won. They died because the rest of us did not understand that the winning was the most dangerous moment of all. Hope is the last thing the sea takes, and it takes it at the very instant hope looks most like salvation. A man is never in more danger than when he believes he is finally safe, and that is true on the water, and it is true off it, in every life I have ever watched, including my own. The crisis rarely gets us. What gets us is the moment just after, when we set down our guard because we are sure the worst is past. I have seen it on land as often as at sea, once I knew to look for it. The man who comes through the long illness and dies in the recovery. The family that survives the lean years and comes apart in the first easy one. The heart that endures every hard thing and finally breaks on the day it is at last allowed to rest. It is the same law everywhere, and the sea only shows it plainer than most, that the guard we let down the moment we feel safe is the very guard we most needed to keep, and that the danger is patient and waits for exactly that moment, and takes us not in the fight but in the long breath of relief that comes after it. I do not tell you this to make you afraid. I tell you so that when your own worst thing seems at last to be passing, you will know to hold on 1 hour longer than feels needed. Because that hour, the one right after the danger, is the one that has quietly taken more good souls than the danger itself ever did. So tell me, down in the comments, where have you seen it? Not the danger in the storm, but the danger in the calm right after it. The harm that came not in the crisis, but in the moment everyone breathed out and believed it was over. Put it below. I would like to know I am not the only one who has learned to distrust the feeling of being safe. Next time, I'll tell you about the men who beat the sea outright, who swam, or were carried, or crawled all the way to solid ground with the whole ocean behind them, and who died there, on dry land, on the sand, within sight of home, for a reason almost no one understands, and every one of them could have survived. Until then, mind your fire, and never trust the moment a man believes he's safe.